Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the south-afrifur Pawdcast. You're listening to myself, Ivik Wolf, here on this wonderful Friday evening. It's Friday. What the? Yeah, Saturday, Sunday. I wish it was Friday, actually.
God, I wish it was
And
Friday.
yeah, totally want Friday back again. But yeah, for those of you who have joined us this evening, we've got a whole bunch of people in chat. And yeah, for our guest for the last time in a month now?
Mm-hmm.
It's been a month. We have Tantroo McNally, one of the editors. Do I say one of the editors? The head editor
Just one of the editors.
for Flayrah. Am I wrong here? I don't know. Yes.
No, that's how you pronounce it. Yep.
Cool.
It's named after the word carrot in a Watership Down.
Yeah. Which was pretty much almost considered to be like manna from heaven, almost, or not?
It's good food, like like it's the beautiful food or something like that. I can't remember the quite.
All right, and so maybe just for the people who are listening who probably I'm not wondering. We do have a whole bunch of international people, and I'm assuming that Flayrah is more. Although you are an international platform, you run more. What's the word? English-speaking countries. So
Yeah, most of our writers are from English-speaking countries.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Green Reaper is usually pretty good about trying to keep things international. We're pretty freeform with that. Like if you guys use commas instead of parent, like there's like these little nuances between countries, obviously. Oxford commas, like we tend to pretty be laissez-faire about the style of the people who are writing, and they're introducing their country's nuances, whether you use the Z or the S, things like that.
Yeah.
Spell specialize.
I'm a Yankee, so I would do it with a Z or Z. We call it Z. You guys call the British call it Z.
Yeah, it's something that's actually what's the word? It's balanced itself into South African culture, calling it Z. I tend to still call it a Z, but like some of my backgrounding is actually, I spent 4 years in America, so it actually depends on the day. All right. So again, like, what was the concept of Flayrah actually? Like, what was the entire sort of like base understanding? Why, how, and all those kinds of questions.
In short, what is a Flayrah?
Flayrah.com is a furry news website, which has been going since probably the early 2000s. It has evolved over time. Its very foundation is trying to be archival more than it is freeform, like most social media is these days. It's very in the moment. Here's the thing that's in the moment. It doesn't do very good about archiving situations or news stories. Flayrah has been like WikiFur is about archiving information, and so it really took that foundation in 2010. It really started to go towards major news format in 2010 when Green Reaper basically took over as the editor-in-chief. So if anyone's the lead editor, he's the lead editor right now. So basically, before that, it was almost like an extension of the furry.usenet sort of community. A lot of people who were in furry.usenet, I think, were in the earlier Flayrah days, to make it more sort of a website base. But right now, unfortunately, the website's down. So if you were to go to Flayrah.com right now, for some reason their protocol's being silly again. So that'll probably be up probably before the end of the podcast. But
okay. All right, and what kind of questions? What kind of media do you guys normally cover?
We typically, a lot of the when Fred Patton was alive, and unfortunately he's passed on, he did a lot of reviews. Reviewing furry media content is actually a very big staple, and we'll do reviews of BoJack Horseman or the latest season of Agretzko. But we also cover, obviously the furry fandom itself, sort of the meta topics of the fandom. Discussions about conventions, decisions and stuff like that conventions make, things like that. One of the two conventions that are happening this weekend actually had interesting sort of things stem around them. Was Indie Fir Con is this weekend, and so is Brazil Fur Fest. If you know, Brazil Fur Fest had sort of a little fervor happen over their little Converse advertisement. So we discussed that and sort of we like to try to make it so that we take pieces of what happens on social media and present them in a broader context so that people go, what's going on? Like, because like sometimes people will jump in the middle of conversation on social media and like they'll hear it from one person, but it's like, what's the foundation of all that? That's sort of what Flavor's goal should be, is to try to get it so that all that information is readily there.
Right. And so with Flayrah, I mean, how did you sort of initially get involved with the website and writing and things like that?
Interestingly, like when I was young and younger than I am today, probably it was about 23 years old when I joined as a writer. I would like, it was one of Green Reaper's first longer form articles, because he used to write a lot for Flayrah back when he first took it over and it was his new fresh baby. One of the controversies that had happened, I remember the first article that I recalled was when one furry was basically banned from Anthrocon due to basically that he was doing open carry in the city and was detained for open carry near an airport. It wasn't at the convention space, and so there was sort of a controversy over whether or not that should have happened or not. And so his article sort of went over that, in what was sort of long form. And I found that sort of interesting that a site was trying to do sort of long form coverage of these sort of events in the fandom. And back then I was a young rebellious spirit. So I'm like, oh yeah. Like, let's talk about the decisions that our leadership is making and stuff like that. So as you grow older, obviously you start to understand a little bit more about, individuals' decisions in those positions, right? It's like, it's a security issue, right? And it's like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So do we make a strong stance on that? Back then I was more idealistic, so I was sort of like, you shouldn't have been banned. So it's interesting that people's viewpoints change over time when they get more information. And that's the whole thing, is that, information is sort of a bridge to understanding a little bit more about the world around you.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously with your work with Flayrah and that, like, I mean, you're obviously talking about a what do you call it, an ideology shift between when you were. How much did your work with Flayrah kind of influence your personal ideologies from then till now?
As far as personal ideologies, they haven't changed too much, but I would say that, in this sort of crazy world that we sort of live in now, my personal ideologies sort of come more to the forefront. Typically I'm pretty lax and stuff like that, unless someone's being sassy in the comment section. I think that's one of the things, but and I can sometimes be a little sassy too, but other than that, like, I think as you mature, you learn more about the limits of individuals. And when you're young, you see these grown-ups and you're like, oh, they're all powerful, they can just do whatever and they can just change everything. And it's like, what you realize when you get older, it's like, well, not really, because there are other grown-ups who also have influence, and it's not always easy to get everyone on the same page. Or even like if they're all working together and all on the same team, it's still about communicating and like and proper communication, and not making sure that miscommunication happens and can lead to mistakes being made and things like that. It becomes a lot more nuanced and understanding that it's like, oh wow, like these people aren't as all powerful as I thought, because now I'm one of them.
Right.
Yeah, and sort of on the topic with regards to you being or you working for a source of information regarding the furry fandom and whatnot. What's your take on sort of how quickly word spreads, like news spreads throughout the fandom, and the trend towards like misinformation being spread so easily. Like, I mean, anyone can jump on Twitter and like post something, and how quickly negative media can catch fire. Essentially, like, what's your take on that?
Well, it's somewhat even worse than that, because we now have governments that are promoting misinformation for their own purposes and doing it psychologically. I went to school actually not for journalism but computer science, and one of the biggest hacks that you can do is social engineering.
Yep.
It's probably one of the easiest things you can do. It's figuring out what people's fears are and sort of tapping into them, or just pretending that you are in the place even though you're not supposed to be.
And the best part about it is it's free.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely free. No coding required. If you're very good at speaking with people and understanding what people are, how people behave and how people act in certain social situations, you can easily take advantage of that kind of situation. So the having knowledge about words and their intent and sort of the intentions of other people is extremely important, and because someone could be acting as your friend, but they might be trying to manipulate you into doing something else. Time is always a big factor in it. To me, when it comes to social media and things going, you're never going to be first in these days. People in media are not going to be first, and unfortunately, I don't think the mainstream media, quote unquote, has sort of learned that yet. So it's more like, to me, it's if I see something on fire on Twitter, I'll take information down. But if I don't care about it in a week, I'll tend to go, well, maybe it wasn't as important as people thought in the moment. Whereas if it's still sort of like in my mind going, this is somewhat of an important topic to talk about in a certain way, then I'll decide to sort of do that as coverage.
Yeah. But even like a week is almost too much for the internet these days.
Oh yeah, and it's like, it's the problem is like if people are impatient. It's interesting when you talk about Star Wars and people going to the dark side. It's like it was Anakin's impatience, right? That led him down to the dark side. So it's like you have to be patient with things, because time reveals more than It's that whole fight, flight, or freeze response that we as animals have. We're running out of places to flee to as far as that, but that's how immigration and emigration happens. But so people will fight and some people will freeze, and I think freeze is actually in most cases the best route to take, because then you can just wait and take in information and then make an assessment based on the new information that comes in.
Fair point. Just cooler heads will prevail, hopefully.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just semi-distracted for no apparent reason. So with yeah. Okay. So
he froze.
Yeah, I froze. Haha. So now we do have a question written here about like source checking and things like that, and I mean, obviously, as far as furry media is gone, there is, if I remember, I've read a couple of the reports and things like that on Flayrah, of course, but like large amount of the time, sometimes people sort of go out and write about particular stories or write about a particular person without background checking or anything like that, and they sort of write something about someone and then they still post it. And like, is there a means that sort of gets checked from Flayrah's side that too personal, or like if the story's too, what's the word, personal opinion of a particular thing, does that ever get checked out?
Opinion articles are allowed, but they have they can't be personal attacks, for sure. And they do. There are a few articles that we have received that never made it to publication because the amount of time that had passed since the quote unquote incident had occurred, that was sort of a thing, and also that it was only one source, saying that X had happened, this bad thing had happened like those 5 years ago, it's not really enough to start going forward to. When it comes to unfortunate circumstances, the biggest thing that people have to do is come forth with education, particularly people who have been victims of those kind of crimes, and saying, here's how I fell for this. This is the situation I found myself in. Because them sharing their stories, someone might be in that situation right now and not even know it. And then when somebody who's been a victim in that thing that's going to happen to this other person in the future that they don't know they're in that position, if they read their story, they might understand, oh, well, maybe I should be more cautious about the direction I'm going. Education is a very big thing. I know that there was this big issue about individuals being on staff who, had a certain, what's it called? I'm trying to be nuanced here. Criminal background histories from the 90s where they had unfortunate relations with underage individuals. You can remove those people from the convention. That's fine. But the issue is that there are people who haven't been charged yet who might try to use the same tactics that we don't even know about, that are, walking around the furry fandom. You don't know. The only way you can know is educating youngsters, the whole stranger danger thing, those kind of things. Those are important. And that sort of education is important. It's more important probably than what news people do, because news people sort of clean up after the whole mess has already gone down. But education can help prevent those situations from happening in the first place. So if a journalist can use their work in order to help the person who's educate, that's probably for the better.
I mean, and with that sort of like, if that's the nuance for things like news media, and especially within the furry sort of sphere of things, like it would obviously mean that there's a very sort of heavy focus on making sure that the information that you have is correct as much as it possibly can be. And if you don't have that kind of information, you put that down as like a, what do you call it? A caveat. We don't necessarily have all the information here. This is what we know.
Put a pin in it, basically. Like, put a pin in it. If there's more patterns that come out that indicate that that has more evidence towards it, then that can be sort of brought up. One of the big ones, back in 2017, I believe it was, Rocky Mountain Fir Con ended up having to shut down its doors because of the whole sovereign citizen sort of debacle that happened there. Somebody had actually written an article like before it had actually closed its doors, and then that Monday afternoon was like a whole big rush of like, I got home from work, and then it's like from like that until I went to bed, it was like conversations and talking with people and all this stuff, because it was like, it happened really quick. Like, Dogpatch had released his article about the sovereign citizen thumbnail thing, or the red thumbprint thing. And that's the thing that Boozy Badger ended up referencing later, and then ended up joining the fandom over. So it's like Billy Joel song here. And then our article was about the whole like tax issue about them being a nonprofit and not having their taxes in order. And then I can't remember his name. It starts with an L. I think it's Lambert. I'm bad with names, unfortunately. It was a bunny dude from UK. He had actually written an article about the whole tax side of the issue, and like before it had come to that, like the headline had changed before it even got published, because he's like, oh, I got information that they're gonna close, and I went, okay, so we're gonna make that the headline. You're gonna edit whatever you need to edit. We will not post this until they make the official announcement, and we'll link the official announcement, because at that point it's like, we don't want to post something and then it end up not being the case. Like we go, oh, they're closed, and it's like, they didn't announce it yet, right? You don't want to put yourself in that position. So it's sort of like, you do, sometimes you have to be patient, even though it's like you have information that no one else has. Taking the time to get that information into something that is solid is worth the time.
Raccoon asks if it was Lamar.
I believe it was Lamar.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I could look at the article, but unfortunately the site's down.
It's apparently back up again.
Oh, okay, good.
Apparently.
It is.
Yay.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, the entire Rocky Mountain Fir Con thing is here. So, being able to run or like be involved in the running of something like this, I'm assuming that in many senses, tallest trees gather the most wind, kind of thing. I probably butchered that one completely, but like, have you ever sort of found yourself in a position where you were being harassed by somebody because of your connection with something like Flayrah?
Now I'm gonna knock on wood here, because interestingly, like I've heard horror stories from like people in Dogpatch and all that stuff, and I've been lucky enough not to have gotten a lot of that kind of thing. I get sass every once in a while in the YouTube comments, but those are YouTube comments. What are you gonna do?
Mm.
Whereas, but that wasn't normal. That wasn't really over like things I covered that someone had an issue with. It was more of just general people, general furry, your furry hot things. But as far as like based on, things that we've covered, not too really. I tend to have a knack with language enough to soften the blow enough where I don't make it into a personal attack or make it read like a personal attack, even if there is a person sort of in the spotlight, as it were. Even if there is a spotlight on an individual, I tend to broaden it out to more towards the behaviors and trying to figure out that kind of thing. So I think I've succeeded enough where I don't have people seeing me as an enemy and attacking me back. That might change, obviously, over the course of time as more and more stories come out and the fandom grows larger, but we'll knock on wood, obviously.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a difference between sort of objective journalism and acting someone on Twitter kind of thing. Like, there's a lot of leeway there where you can get away with, or not get away with, I suppose, where it could be understood that what you're doing is just reporting on something as opposed to making a personal attack against someone.
Well, yeah, the number of characters certainly does help.
Fair point.
It's hard to have a nuanced speech with 240 characters, even if you do get to hit that plus button as much as you want.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's speaking of Twitter, sort of the fact that Twitter is this kind of open platform, and you said like big news sites are rarely ever the first to get information these days. It almost feels like anyone with a Twitter account and some screenshots tends to be the person who gets information out first. Like, how do you guys like effectively utilize Twitter, if I may ask? Like, do you guys use that as sources, or how does that go?
So as far as Twitter usage goes, it is a big platform where you can get a lot of things. It's sort of like if you're into music, right? You have like the streaming or like a furry.fm or something like that. You can listen to a whole bunch of music from different genres and stuff like that. And you have streaming services and whatnot. But then if you get like really focused, if you're like, oh, I really like that song is really interesting to me. You can get more in contact with that person and sort of like learn more about the situation on their end. So it's more, Twitter is not really good for focused journalism with more nuance. It's more like, here's a smattering of things on a wall. Try to connect them in a way that's actually a story, rather than, because Twitter feeds is like, it's there here today, gone tomorrow, and all that.
Yeah, fair point.
So like if you use Twitter in a way where you can take the stories of the individuals and sort of put them into a thing, getting their perspectives, it's better that way, to do it that way, especially if they find, if after a week has passed, that they're going to leave their tweets up. It's like all the fervor sort of gone. It's not going to be like there's this tweet gone and there's this tweet in. So it gives it a chance to sort of cool down a little bit. So I think I don't know if I answered the question or not. If I was being like, I danced around the question and started answering my own question.
No. I think that was a good answer.
Yeah. And I mean, just I guess sort of bouncing on that one, obviously, with the idea of urgency around what we would consider to be called what political furries coming out and attacking things like, you as journalists when you're running a story on something controversial. I mean, what's the word? Like thingy.
Mhm.
The other one.
I don't know.
I'm terrible with names. The other news group.
Oh, Dogpatch.
Dogpatch.
Yes, Dogpatch. Like Dogpatch tends to sort of, I don't know, it seems to get itself in trouble a bit more often than Flayrah does in some of the like stories it runs. And again, this is probably just because they were targeted at one point. Like, do you fear that kind of targeting from other people?
Um, if I do, I do. I grew up in high school as much as the next person, and I was not really the most popular of individuals. So people randomly targeting you for reasons you never really fully understand is something that I kind of grew up in. And just like trying to stay, focused on my studies and not care about like throwing myself into books because the people around me were like, what? I don't get you. What? I don't understand you. So I'm just going to throw myself into these books. That's sort of my superhero background. But so basically, like, it may come one day. I'm not sure. Usually those kind of things come when a leader of a particular group of individuals wants to discredit the entire organization for some reason or another for a particular article that was read, and then their followers will all sort of
Bandwagon.
do what they knew to discredit it, like the whole fake news, CNN's fake news, all that stuff. It's a known tactic. In fact, I just recently realized why Donald Trump holds his freaking press conferences in front of the helicopters. It's because it drowns out the reporters. Because I was watching it and I couldn't hear what the reporter asked, and then he answered the question. And it makes the reporter seem like weaker because they're shouting over this, and he has a mic like right to his chest, and you can hear him clearly. Whereas the reporter has to sound like they're shouting in a wind tunnel in order to get heard. So there are tactics like that are used by people in power to try to discredit people who are interested in information. Educating people on those tactics is a very important process as well. And I don't think any of the mainstream really caught on to that yet, but like I think that's the reason that he's been doing that. A lot of people have joked about that over the time. It's like, he's always holding his helicopter conferences, but it might actually be intent on that, from what I can see.
All right. Do you feel, and this is going to be an interesting question, I think. Do you feel that there's still a need for this kind of like news reporting?
Oh, absolutely. The thing about a good journalist is that they're kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none. They're interested in a lot of information from a lot of different fields, but they're not going to be the kind of person that's going to go in and get a master's degree in something. Computer science actually is an interesting one, and it's an interesting degree to have. I have a bachelor's in it with, it was like in the subset was cognitive science, which is like the study of cognition and AI sort of things. So that sort of background actually helps me a lot in this whole, wide versus tall sort of knowledge base, because a lot of times, a lot of people who use computers and create interfaces are dealing with a whole bunch of different schools of thought, like when it comes to taxes or finances or law or infrastructure. Like, computer scientists have got their hands in a lot of pots these days because people are trying to automate as much of these kind of processes as possible. So being able to understand, and not only understand, but be able to communicate to other people, to simplify it in a way that they can understand, those higher sort of educational thoughts. You take their lingo and you translate it. Furry's got a lot of lingo. And so being able to translate a lot of lingo in the furry fandom and saying this is what this means is actually kind of a good exercise in that too. But yeah, it's very important. I think giving a good broad knowledge base and having it written down is very important for sure.
All right. So, and with that, like, I mean, where do you think the fandom itself is currently sort of finding itself, because I mean we have the semi controversy around BFF or Brazil Fir Con, and the way that they sort of Fur Fest,
yeah.
And the fact that they're sort of there was large amount of like shouting about the fact that they're commercializing furry and this and that and the other thing. And I mean, it's I also like, I mean, because of my own personal sort of interest in something like that, um, like I find it to be relatively overblown. Um, People need to make money somewhere, and at the end of the day, if that's the only place you can make money, then do it, because it keeps your convention alive. And that's been sort of the information that I get from something like that. But like the outside influences in, or I don't even know how you would say this, internalized external influences on the fandom itself, where do you think we're currently moving towards?
Yeah, so nothing happens in a vacuum. Obviously, like the furry fandom is somewhat of an insular community, but like more and more as we're growing older, and there's another wave of furries coming in who are younger than us. We've had a positive influence on those who are younger than us, and I think that that's cool, and that's something that that's great. The thing is, like, people's so if we're talking about, like, let's go back to the whole shoe ad thing. I did do an article on that. It's called Shoe Ad Drops Gets Furries to Converse, quote unquote, about marketing and fandom. Horrible puns. That's something that people do. NPR style puns. Converse. So they're, when it comes to that, you can kind of understand where people are coming from, sort of on both sides. Like, Brazil is trying to work hard, and it like, and I learned this just recently after, and this is a good time to plug somebody else. Ash Coyote did a YouTube video where she interviewed Crash Azurel, which was one of the main community leaders, I suppose, in Brazil, or one of the most well-known furries that is, I think, in Brazil. He does a lot of videos, or he did a lot of Vine videos back in the day.
Rip Vine.
So, yep, Vine. Was it Vine? It's now TikTok. I don't know.
Rip. Yeah, I just want to pour one out for Vine. I miss it.
Yeah, I think furries are trying to make TikTok what Vine was, but I don't know if they're succeeding or not. Because obviously it's a different platform. But anyways, back to the whole the shoe thing. Like, she allowed him to come on, and he talked a lot about the Brazil furry community, which is great, because I'm terrible with interpersonal things. I'm very good about, like, collecting information from those sort of resources and then sort of bring them together in a written form. I'm not so good with interview, but the whole reason I began a YouTube channel was to try to get better at speaking off the cuff, because I was doing it in one take and all that stuff. So that's the whole thing I did. That's the reason I went into YouTube, which I think helps, because I need that in work too. So Ash Coyote did this interview with Crash, and so Crash explained that this Abandono furry convention that happened down there and closed. Abando, it ended up closing its doors because of financial issues, because the people had put them so far underwater. They were expecting more people than actually attended, and I didn't know that. In fact, Flayrah did cover Abando's closing, but it never really said why it happened, but did talk about, like, other parts of the community. It was a short article written by Green Reaper. And so after that video came out, I was able to go to the comment section of that and says, well, now we know why. And so I think they're trying to prevent that from happening again. It's very difficult for Brazil, because it's like their currency is weaker than a lot of those mainstream countries, and they have to work with what they got, and it can be very tricky. So I made some suggestions as to, like, maybe we can make this sort of like, how religions do it. It's like they get things in an offering plate, and then they put it towards their missions in other countries. It's like, maybe furry can do something like that, or support other conventions and help them get off their feet, and in particular regions that might not have one currently, stuff like that. It's certainly, there's solutions to the problem. If the furry fandom really wants to be self-grown, and really doesn't want to have reliance on outside on help, then we need to go, okay, what can we do to build a network so that we can have that support internally, right? You can't just say, oh, work it out, it's like, we come up with a solution, right? If that is the goal, and it's a fine goal, because you don't want to rely too much on outsiders, right? Because if Converse ends up pulling back, then if they were reliant on that dollar, then their convention is no longer solvent, right? And so that can be a concern. It's like, we want to make sure that there's not another Abando, that for Brazil Fur Fest doesn't become like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's I mean, that is sort of the issue that a lot of people sort of get round to, is just that, like, because I think on the one hand Brazil has so many like sort of confirmed furries out there, that if they were to have a convention, they would need to have a place that would be over 1,000 or things like that. Where, say, South Africa, I mean, yeah, there might be maybe confirmed around about 300, 400 furries. About 50 of them are going to be able to make it out to any one location. And so, like, I mean, there are many ways to skin a cat, I guess. Sort of like, for us, we kept our numbers as low as we possibly could to ensure that we don't overshoot our budget and get stuck in that kind of place. It's just, weirdly enough, we actually used Scratch, correct me if I'm wrong, we kind of used Abando as one of our, like, we shouldn't do that kind of things, like, don't overshoot.
Yeah, and not specifically Abando, but just like, that is obviously the unfortunate occurrence of what happened when you do overshoot. So I guess you could use it as an example, but I mean, it's also a little bit of a cautionary tale that we used to put our numbers in perspective. Like, how many people can we honestly get, and what's realistic for us?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's not even just Brazil. There have been probably a handful of American conventions that have closed. Fir Con this year closed because of that whole financial issue and not having an overestimating how many people would show up in Maine, which is like this is a state in the very, very upper right corner for those who are not familiar. It's very much foresty area. It's pretty rural, but it does have a few like little small cities. So that's why they called it Fir Con. So
that kind of town.
Right? It's Stephen King, the horror novelist, has a lot of. He grew up in that area and does a lot of his stories take place in that area.
And yeah, so I mean, like, with that, and I guess being public facing in respect to a large amount of the things that you do, have you ever, again, like, I'm gonna push this one again, but like, being public facing, things that you've possibly said and things like that, has that ever been sort of difficult to sort of get out of, anything like that? Is there ever a point somebody's gone to you and said, hey, I don't see you or your, like, news group commenting on this, why aren't you commenting on this?
So if it is the question, like, if why have we remained silent, or like, because there's sort of two questions there. One is saying we remained silent when we shouldn't have, and the other one saying that we talked when we shouldn't.
Yeah, well, maybe answering both, if both of them are applicable.
Okay. So we haven't really gotten too much in the whole like silence thing. I think Flayrah is still small enough where we're not expected to respond instantaneously. I do get an at every once in a while if someone wants to draw attention to something. I think one of the recent ones was Safi from who's the chair of Portlandia. Recently had an issue with basically not being allowed to attend Anthro Northwest. So that was a thing. I haven't made the full article on that. I still have to contact Anthro Northwest about that for more comment. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud. See, there you go. When I said something I shouldn't have said. But as far as it goes, it's like as far as like the most controversial thing that probably ended up happening to me, as far as like someone opposing my statements, was probably to Griffin. I did a video about hate crime statistics and stuff like that. He had made a tweet about pool deaths versus hate crime statistics, and then I broke down why it wasn't really apples to apples, and then he made a counter video, and then that's sort of where he was like, oh, we should do an interview sometime, and I'm like, I'm going to hold on that. I need to. And at the end, it's like, I don't want it to be like the idea of debate is sort of outdated a little bit. I think it's kind of overstayed its course in human discussion. But
also dead these days. Like the art of debate is just like who wins over the masses emotionally more so than reasonably.
Correct. And I mean, like it's not like even like it's sort of more of a combative style of things, and I kind of like they fly these candidates out here to get on this platform, and then they yell at each other for like an hour, where it's like they could have this over the internet and save a lot of gas and money, and you don't need an audience going yay and boo, and it's like that doesn't help anything really. I think it's an outdated platform as far as debate goes. And if they are going to keep it, there's better ways to do it. There was this idea from one of these videos about having like a chess clock, where if someone starts talking, they take time off of their time, and the person who's silent, reserves their time. And then at the end of the whole session, if one of them runs out of time, then the other person gets to talk for the rest of the time. And it's like, you don't want to use up your time too much. I think the idea of we have these like little rules and stuff that we put in place, and those rules are sort of eroded to the point where the person who's being assertive can just run the board if they ignore the rules.
Wrong.
Yeah. No, I completely understand that. It's
yeah.
Essentially, as long as you like, it doesn't matter whether you're like technically wrong or not, as long as it just doesn't look like you're giving up ground.
Yeah. Because that seems to be the way that debating happens these days. It's not politics anymore. It's who gets to use the minimal amount of words the best.
Yeah. Who's shouting the most?
Yeah,
be punchy. Be witty. Well, witty. I wish it were witty. If it were witty, it would actually be interesting. But it's mostly just punchy. But I mean, that's and so like I decided, it's like, I'm not gonna do interviews on this channel. I'm just gonna like talk about the thing that I want to talk about for the week, and talk about the news in and of itself. I don't want to make it about myself. I don't want to be an arc of personality. That's a big thing. The difference between sort of being a pundit and sort of being a journalist is you don't make it about yourself. You hope that people don't know who you are by name, because you would rather have the story of the people you're talking about stick out and be the thing that people remembered, rather than it being who said it and who gave you the information.
Exactly.
I think a lot of the people in the sort of punditry style of journalism really get like addicted to the thrill of being the person that informs people, and they're the ones that they hang on their every word. It's sort of the dark side of journalism, just as you have dark side of politics, where you have the cult of personality sort of thing.
Be Alex Jones.
Yeah. You could be
frickin' frogs. I did an article about him too.
Yeah.
I called what he does Mailvon.
Okay, explain.
Mailvon. So in America, we have something called Avon, which is a product service where women would come with women products to the household, and do nails and do makeup and stuff like that, and try to sell effeminate sort of products to ladies while talking about things that they care about, the social political things of the day. Typically it was bigger when the man was at work and the woman was at home, and then the Avon lady would come and like sell products to her while talking about the day. So when I say Mailvon, what I mean is that Alex Jones comes into the he's the male version of Avon, where he comes into the room, talks about the things that men care about today, and then tries to sell you the supplements and the things on the side, to make his trip worth it.
Yep.
That's incredibly accurate.
That is actually. Do you? I mean, and it's probably difficult sometimes to be candid, especially if you're, I guess, sometimes kind of putting your own sort of thoughts and things like that on blast. Do you find it difficult to be candid in any other parts of the like sort of internet, like when people are like, oh, it's him, it's that person, we must watch what we say, kind of thing? Do you feel that that's sort of accurate or inaccurate in respect to your ability to deal with other people around you?
Funnily enough, first it helps that I'm pretty hermitish and I don't really talk with too many people too often. But as far as like that sort of thing going on, it's like if what you say to me is in private and in person and it's not really something that's impacting other people, I tend to not share that kind of information. If it's criminal, obviously it's like, well, maybe I should like call the cops or something. But if it's just like interpersonal issues, that's sort of a big thing too. It's like if it's an interpersonal dispute that's going on, that's not world news. That's not like, oh, this is important to the fandom about these interpersonal issues. Other than like maybe as I mentioned earlier, the Anthro Northwest and the Portlandia thing, where you have two leaders of conventions sort of having a personality dispute that got rather ugly because it's happening to a leadership position rather than just your normal attendee. But I think learning how to deal with interpersonal disputes is a very important thing. And sometimes, like, unfortunately, like we don't have very good examples of that today, unfortunately, because the sort of ways that leadership is handling interpersonal disputes is not how they typically have been handled or should be handled. It's basically the old generation not being used to having access to social media and airing their dirty laundry out in the public, and having this sort of cognitive dissonance. It's like that what you're saying in the general public is actually having an influence on the general public's behavior. Maybe like do the old fashioned way where you resolve get that anger out behind closed doors before figuring out if you need to make it or break it, it's hard to keep that reserved about me. Like sometimes obviously it's like I care about other people and I want to make sure that they're living the best lives that they can, and I know that other individuals have something else in mind. They want to exploit, they want to do things like that. But it's important that you keep a cool head in every circumstances, because if you start shouting at the individual without good solid evidence behind you, people are not going to take your words seriously. If it's the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
Someone's written it already. It's the boy who cried wolf. You can, if you're going to make an accusation and it doesn't stick, eventually, if it doesn't stick multiple times, people are going to start ignoring it when it actually is a problem at one point.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's such a fine balance between like, again, wanting to be the first person to put something out there versus like holding back until all the evidence is there, like you said. It must be a tough juggling act.
Yeah. I mean,
it can be tough. Mostly, like, furry fandom is actually pretty chill compared to, like, obviously mainstream journalism and things like that, which I don't have much experience in, unfortunately. Like, I don't have much experience in, like, actual newsrooms talking about, like, local politics and stuff like that. It's like, I know there are some furries who have gotten a degree in that, and I did one of them. I hope that he decides to, come on board Flayrah, but, obviously he's got things that he's got to do too. I did get one good story from him though, and that was he was having an issue with getting a fursuit, because unfortunately, it's interesting, like what people focus on and what actually is the mainstream thing that has a problem. In furry fandom, it's like, oh, sex and like sex, drugs, and mostly sex. like is the big thing that people do.
Always.
Sexual controversies, like, you know, abuses and things like that. And that's important stuff to talk about, but I think that under that is also like petty fraud and things like that can occur within the fandom that happen as well, that people aren't really fully aware of because it's not really the big thing. You know, where you commission an artist and they don't get back to you, how do you handle it? And luckily, furry fandom is starting to provide sort of business solutions to that, like Art Economy and, you know, Furry Network have their sort of pseudo escrow sort of style thing where, you know, you work with the artist, you pay a third party, and that third party holds the money until both parties are satisfied. Sort of that kind of thing. You know, we come up with, you know, if there's a problem, it's a big enough problem, people come up with solutions. And then when people come up with solutions, if it's a good solution, you can present it out to people using the platform and things like that. And it's how things evolve from the Wild West into sort of a more structured thing.
Do you think that we're going in the right direction overall?
As far as the furry fandom, I think we are. As far as the world goes, not so much. I think that it's sort of a tricky thing. It's sort of, you know, you have this thing of evolution, right? And it's I've programmed genetic algorithms in high school and in college, and one of the things I remembered from that is that you program the environment, you program the data points, and the data points eventually, you know, reach their aptitude with the environment. And when it starts to hit that, there's sort of like this like little ripple that happens. Like it improves sometimes, then it goes down sometimes, and improves sometimes, goes down sometimes. So like really evolution of ideas and stuff like that isn't really like, oh, it's always improving and it's always going to improve at like a linear path. It's sort of like an LN function where it sort of curves and hits a line, and it sort of improves slower from there. And I think furry fandom is sort of in the point where it is sort of hitting that line, but I think that there's going to be cool stuff coming yet. But humanity certainly has. I think that every generation is not a solution, even though we try to. And then this is the problem with, like, this is the whole angst of each generation. It's like, we're going to solve all the problems. Yeah, we're going to solve all the problems that the previous generation did. Yeah. And then it's like, then they get to the end of their life and it's like, well, we didn't solve all the problems, and there were some problems we didn't even know about. And so, like, really, it's more of a recursive definition rather than a recursion, rather than a solution. It's like each generation has its own problems that it has to resolve, and whether it succeeds and fails in that is really up to, you know, how well we've educated ourselves and how well we're ready for it.
Do you think that, and with that, do you think that the legacy left by, say, people who came before us, who might have been, like, say, writing for Flayrah, or might have been connected to previous iterations of some sort of online media and things like that? And I mean, okay, I'm going to get to this, but like, with the way that their interactions may have been, I guess, in some senses harmful to the fandom as a whole. I mean, like, where we're talking about, like, say, Tumbles the Stair Dragon, or like people who were spoken about, still sort of being spoken about in the media now. Do you think that the media covering people like that still is good or bad for the way that we sort of interact with one another? Maybe not even as cautionary tales, but, like, say, they've been brought back by other media formats or other groups where they've been given some form of power.
All right, so I think the general idea there is this is a big thing in Europe too, where you have the concept of the right to forget. The idea is that if an article is really old and it doesn't impact somebody else, and it's still the first person's Google result. Like, I think the guy who brought the lawsuit had like a bankruptcy in 1994, and he was having trouble getting a job because his employers would look up his name, and there it is in 1994, you had to file for bankruptcy, and so we're not going to hire you, even though it's already like the mid 2000s. How long do you have to carry that sin? And there is a philosophy of thought in Europe that it's like, well, it should be forgotten over a period of time. Like, you shouldn't, like, Google has to go out of its way to sort of delist or move in outdated information like that so that people aren't misinterpreting it as like, oh, this still applies to him today. Like that whole sin is carried on his back. In comedy, it's called comedy is tragedy plus time. Forgiveness is repentance plus time. And I think that is sort of something that needs to be highlighted, in my opinion. If people move in the direction, if they did something awful like in 1994, they have to acknowledge that they did something awful, and then they have to say, here's the awful thing I did, here's how I'm repenting for it. And then time has to happen, because and that's the big part. If time doesn't go by, then people are going to say, oh, he's just saying it, right? And it's like they're just trying to save face and stuff like that. And but over time, if a person is really repentant on the sins of their past, then eventually people will go, okay, yeah, this is legitimate, and eventually the decriers will be smaller and smaller until it's the point of probably the people that were most directly harmed by the individual, because that they'll probably never forgive, right? It's like if somebody wrongs you, it's hard to forgive them directly if it was really directly impacting you. Whereas like society in general is usually more forgiving if you didn't directly harm them, but it won't be obviously if they're your friends or the friends of the friends or whatever. It is something that requires, once again, patience. You can't just guilt people, go, why haven't you forgiven me yet? Why haven't you forgiven me yet? It's like, because it's up to them. Like, it's not up to you.
No, and I can agree with that completely. And I mean, I guess with say, for instance, particular terms and terminology in linguistics, and I actually speak about this often with my students. The fact that like certain people can't use certain terms in certain like social instances, particularly because the terms themselves still have that kind of weight and meaning to them. And in that same sense, that if I've done something like egregiously wrong, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we have prison terms, isn't it? Like if I've murdered somebody, then I'm going to get at least 25 years in prison by the South African system. And depending on the severity of that, they can add on particular amounts of years. That's sort of the amount of, I guess, it's, I don't know, it's like a human ideology of how much time you need to have to repent for something like that. But it's the same thing for, like, say, using something like there's an Afrikaans term or South African term, which is the exact same as the N word in
the US.
In the US. It starts with a K, and using that one, for instance, now in linguistically in America, the N-word itself has been taken by the community that it was pointed to and has been turned into something positive, for instance, in many senses. Whereas in South Africa, saying the K term is still considered to be an egregious an egregious act, one that's that's supposed to be demeaning, that is supposed to be said with that kind of, that neither party actually even uses the term at all. And if they do, there was actually recently, there was a case about it where a person said that to a police officer on like several occasions very angrily, and she died in prison after being incarcerated for 10 years. Do you remember her, Scratch?
I remember her, but
she died recently.
I didn't know that she passed away. That was
Penny Sparrow.
Did she die in prison?
Yeah, she died in prison.
Wow. I know of the case, but I mean, I didn't know. Yeah. Wow. Jeez.
Yeah.
Rough.
So, like, that's the kind of severity that you'd find that sort of thing in. That this person, yeah, maybe they were repentant, and honestly, as far as I've heard, they weren't repentant while they were in prison. And I mean, like, giving that kind of, if you can at least just give the opportunity to say sorry about something, yeah, maybe you can start that healing process. But the person who you've harmed should definitely like be able to be part of the entire conversation.
Right. I mean, it's always tricky when you're dealing with basically interpersonal issues that go out on a larger scale like that, particularly when you're talking about those kind of individual words. I come up with a colloquialism for those kind of words, and I call them bang me, which bang is the exclamation point, and then me as myself. In computer science, when you put an exclamation point in front of something, it means not in most programming languages. So when you're the words that are not me, it's bang me. It works in two ways, because it's a word that talks about someone that's not within my group, not myself, and it also bangs you because you're kind of fucking yourself, right? If you use it. And the reason that a lot of people within, like, if they're using that word but they're within the group, from my understanding at least, like, it's sort of like a vaccine. Like, sometimes people use it as sort of a vaccine, like getting them used to hearing that word from their peers, so in case they hear it from somebody who's not their peer, like, they don't, like, they're a little, I think it'll have a little less of a sting than, because they've heard it and they've been exposed to it. I think that's some of the logic behind why people within a group will use slang like that amongst themselves. And so, like, hopefully that de-escalates the situation so that the other person is clearly in the wrong. The person who used it is clearly in the wrong, and it doesn't escalate to the point where the person who is used against, gets violent or angry or, does stuff like that. I think that's sort of a part of the whole culture behind that kind of a thing. But as far as, like, language usage and free speech, I think, like, Ralkin's probably in the audience right now drooling because now we're talking about this. He wrote some articles for Flayrah about free speech, and they're pretty long-winded. It's a very complicated topic. And I was thinking about it recently, and I think there's, like, two schools of free speech thought. And that is, like, there's a hedonistic free speech, and then there's, like, altruistic free speech, where it's like you have the freedom to speak, but what do you do with that freedom? Where someone in the hedonistic sort of school of free speech thought would be like, you should say whatever the fuck you want to say, wherever you fuck you want to say. I don't give a shit. Like, that freedom should be sacrosanct, and it should be, like, out there. Social nuance, doesn't really take too much into consideration. Whereas, like, an altruistic sort of view of it is, you have your power, you should use it in a responsible manner to sort of bring up. Exactly. And I think that both of them sort of have their place. If somebody doesn't have a lot of power and they're using a hedonistic style of speech, just go for it, right?
Yeah.
But if somebody has a lot of power, like they're given a platform, they're in position of political power, moving towards the altruistic should be more candid. Obviously, we have some person in leadership who doesn't understand that with Twitter, but not naming names or anything, but
using their accent properly.
Yeah, it's all right. So that's what I think the big conflict is, and I think that's sort of where the political divide is really these days, is like this idea of hedonistic free speech and being able to say what you want, when you want to, how you want to, versus sort of a responsible free speech. And interestingly, like, when it comes to individuals who are the altruistic, it's like, if they don't have a lot of power, it really doesn't matter as much whether they're being more responsible for it. But it's not a bad habit to get into in case you do find yourself in a position where you need to use it. Getting yourself used to using language responsibly in a powerful situation, rather than having the less disciplined sort of hedonistic style kind of come out in the forefront and making it seem like that you're not strong in your position.
Yeah. Raccoon has found issue with your pronunciation, apparently, for his name.
Oh, how is it pronounced? He should
Raccoon.
do a...
So, Ra, Ku, and N. Raccoon.
Raccoon. So it sounds almost like raccoon.
Yeah.
Raccoon, yeah.
Raccoon. Yeah.
Got you. I was pronouncing it. Yeah. So here's the funny thing. I've worked with this guy for 5 years. I've never had my pronunciation questioned on it, because I do everything in written form with men in my interactions with him. So it's sort of like R-wing. Like, it's like, until you hear someone say R-wing, it's R-wing. Is it R-wing or or?
And then just Z, or is this Strange Love? Not sure if you're familiar with him.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with them.
They say that apparently we have no idea how hard it is to get you to promote yourself. They've been working with you for years, and there have been times that they've tried to get you to do this, and yeah, so
that goes back to the whole like putting yourself in front of the story kind of a thing. It's sort of like it's a habit you get into where it's like I don't like self-promoting myself because it's like I always fear that it's like the first step down the hole to becoming a pundit. You know what I mean?
Hubris.
So it's like yeah. So like yeah, I don't promote myself. But yeah, I guess Flayrah.com, my name's Sunny is on there. And then I have my world. It's called World in Rue View on YouTube. Rue View, as in kangaroo, ROOVIEW. Oh, you get it?
I got you. I got you. I'm with you.
Not sure. I don't know.
Finger guns.
Yeah, but so like let's maybe just talk about you for a bit since we're on this topic.
Oh boy, here's where I'm gonna flounder.
So with World in Review, like what do you like? How often do you post? Like what can people look out for when they're joining onto that channel?
Okay, so there's two main things I do on the channel. I typically do a furry topic of the week, and I try to post those on Sundays. I've kind of slipped behind a little bit on that recently. I've did the whole like every once in a while, you get like sort of a weird burnout thing going on where you're like, I need to do something, and then you're like, nah. And then as soon as you know, it's like, oh, it's already been 2 weeks, and it's like, oh, well, I should probably make another video again. But normally it would be every Sunday. It's 90% of the time it's every Sunday. There's about a 30-minute video about the current topic, a current event. I try not to cover anything that happened. As I said, I wait a week. So if it happened like the Thursday, I'm not going to do a video on it until like probably the week after, just to give time to happen and let everything settle down and get information all consolidated. The other thing that occurs is I do I sort of do a weekly streaming thing on YouTube where I play an anthropomorphic game, where a video game that has main anthropomorphic characters as the main sort of character. Right now we're doing Winds of Change, which recently came out by Clace, a visual novel. He did Major Minor. We did a Major Minor on the channel as well. Those are put into lists on the channel. So if you want to go back through the lists on the World in Review channel, you can kind of go through and see like what video games we have played, ranging from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 from the NES to obviously Winds of Change, which is a recent game. After we finish a furry game, basically we have this voting session where I play this thing called Of Mice and Sands, which is like this very slow, grindy game where you're like trying to build up this super mouse fort, trying to converse the desert and find this city of El Dorado. It's very much like a city management sort of thing. It's but it takes a long time, so I figured it's like, well, this is sort of long, and if I did them all in a row, it'd be long and boring. So I'm gonna like use this as sort of this game separator, and then people will vote on the next game that we play. And I have like a list of games that have anthro characters, old and new, that are on Steam or on the Switch or anything like that. And people will vote on a rate from 0 to 5. So it's like an alternative voting system where they'll vote how much they want to see that game played. At the end of the night, we'll go, here's what's got the most points, and here's what's got the least amount of points. And the game that's got the least amount of points will just be removed from the list. The one that has the most will be played. And then the next time, 2 new sort of games will be added to the list.
Looking forward to Biomutant?
Biomutant. I think there was like a Road to Eden. We did play that. I don't know if Biomutants. I haven't actually heard of it. Is it a?
It should be out shortly. Let me just double check.
Because that can be added to the list for the next time we go after we do Winds of Change here.
Yeah, Biomutant should be out in is scheduled to be released. Initial release date 2019. At some point, I have no idea, but yeah, it's what's the blurb? Open world post-apocalyptic kung fu fable RPG with a unique martial arts system based on blah 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 blah.
So it's like that rabbit, that old rabbit one on steroids, basically.
Kind of,
like
yeah.
I can't remember. Yeah. So I've added it to the list. So next time I gotta wait for it to come out, obviously, before I put it on the list. Clace actually had very good timing because we had just finished like one of the games right before his release date. Basically, I knew it was going to come out like this last week, so the week before that was our voting session. So I added it to the voting session that week, and I said, "Well, it's going to come out next week, so we'll put that there." So it was great timing on his part. We'd just gotten to the voting session, and then it's like, "Oh, I'm playing an early release for once." That rarely happens.
Nice.
Do you find that, like, what's the word? Do you just weird questions about your fursuit? Do you find that people, what's the word? Respond to you better while you're in suit, or how do you find yourself responding to being in suit?
So in suit, interestingly enough, like you hear stories about furries. I wear a partial, obviously. I don't wear a full suit. And I don't have any interest in wearing a full suit. It's not really my style. B, full suits are a lot more harder to travel with and a lot hotter. And I don't have any real interest in getting a full suit because wearing the suit with the suit works for me. Yeah. That being said, wearing the suit with the suit, like a the business or sports jacket suit sort of thing that I wear with it. Basically, the way people interact with you is different than most furries' stories. Like, because I hear full suiters go, "Don't hug me without permission," and don't roughhouse me, and like, et cetera, et cetera. I hear those kind of like things all the time, where it's like they're in an animal costume, and the general public or other furries get a little roughy without like permission. But with my suit, that doesn't really happen as much because, like, it's sort of a weird juxtaposition where you're wearing a fursuit, but you're also wearing a business suit. So people sort of like have those two different schools of thought when they approach somebody who's wearing an animal costume and then somebody who's wearing a business suit, right? So it's like, what do I do? Do I hug them? Do I give them a handshake? How do I? And I like that juxtaposition. I've noticed that a handful of furries have sort of done that too, and I was like, oh, it's a dapper fur, they call them, I guess.
Okay, dapper fur. Oh, that's actually pretty interesting. There, the strange mentions that you do voice acting on game streams.
I can do voice acting. Unfortunately, like for me, the new Winds of Change actually has their own voice actors, so I don't have to do the voice characters. On the original Major Minor, I had to do some of the voice acting. Like I did a squirrel character, and he talks with a sort of a thing with his incisors on his front of his mouth. So you have like, or I can do Uncle Kage, who goes out there and has some wine. and things like that. So, so also you can do Stitch, and then you do Stitch's voice, and it's Ohana and his family, and I can do voices. Certain voices I can do better than others that I've had practice with. So if a game calls for it, one of my big ones, I think sort of the magnum opus, if you're looking for like me doing sort of voice acting and trying to stumble into it, is the very first video game we did on my channel, which was called A Night in the Woods. That was the launch sort of thing. That was the game had come out, and I'm like, I may as well just stream this. And so, May is the characters are so well written, the voices almost give them out themselves. Like. And so, like, it was very easy to find voices for it. Major Minor was okay written. It wasn't as good as Night in the Woods, so it was harder to find voices, except for if the characters, like, art style sort of, like, sung at a different voice. Like, you'd have, like, the Crow Lady or something like that. But with Night in the Woods, the characters were so well written that it was easy to find a voice. Like you'd have May, so it'd be like, "Hey, I'm May. Oh, just gonna wait over here, and we're gonna see. Hey, fellow kids, how you doing? I'm hanging out here with you, fellow kids." And then I had her voice down pretty quick. Like it was sort of a snarky, feminine, but a little ragged because she's been through a lot. And so that sort of so the voices on that one came out really good. And I don't think I've done better since then. There's not a lot of games that lend you to have to do voice sort of work on them while you're playing them, because most of them are just action oriented, the Mutant Year Zero is, and most of them have voice acting these days. Same with the recently released by Clays.
Yeah.
We still need to do streaming on our channel at some point.
Yes,
streaming.
yes, we do. We should definitely do this. This is one of the things we should get to. But yeah, I don't know. I think we've gone through a large amount of the questions that we've got here. I think.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much tapped out.
Yeah, unless there's something that you want to talk about. Obviously, we spoke about your show, everything like that as well. Is there anything else that you want us to talk about? Anything that you personally want to talk about?
Anything you want to
book?
Anything you want to plug?
So I mean, nonfiction furry nonfiction is a sort of a growing medium in the fandom as it's grown. I think that anyone who's interested, go ahead and come to Flayrah or go to I don't care who you go to, as long as you're doing it. Ash Coyote does her own videos and she does a really good job, really good work on that. If you have topics that you really care about, feel free to voice them. Flayrah is sort of open forum where people can come and write about what they want to write. Obviously, there's a format and things like that, and we'll gladly go over sort of that. In fact, I'm probably going to do videos in the future, sort of going over how to go through the process of writing nonfiction articles like that, and how to the methods and stuff like that. Basically submitting a article to Flayrah 101 kind of a thing, because as much as as much as the skills that you acquire over the years, you're not going to last forever, right? So and on top of that, it also gives the ability to have bandwidth, because right now it's Flayrah is kind of slow to post. There is sort of a slowness to it, which is fine because we don't want to be we want to get things right more than being first. But at the same time, there's certain topics that don't even get covered that really probably should get coverage, like furry content and reviews. Reviews are a good place to start because it's about a medium. It's subjective. It's not, people can get a little sassy about reviews if you don't like something they like, but at the end of the day, it's not like somebody's survival is at stake over your review of and reviewing something right. So if you have a passion, if you like reading comics, if you like doing that, feel free to drop some reviews by, and thanks.
All right. The Strange is asking about a panel at MFF.
There probably will be one. I've got to submit it, and it'll probably be nonfiction writing in the furry fandom. I did one at Anthrocon this year. Obviously not the most popular thing in the world. It's a niche. It's a niche within a niche within a niche. But there are probably a few people going to Midwest Fur Fest that'll probably be really good to talk to see if they want to co-panel it, whether it be Ash Coyote. I don't think Dogpatch comes that far out east. I don't know if he's been to an MFF in a while. But Summer Cat's usually there. Summer Cat's very good. He's a sort of an odder person who has a furry library, where he collects a bunch of books and media, print media of the fandom from the 70s onwards.
Carrying on the tradition of
Fred,
yeah.
Yeah, he's an archivist, sure. but he like actually collects the physical media. I think Fred collecting physical media in his time. I know he was reviewing a bunch.
I think he must have. If I'm not mistaken, isn't he also the person who kind of set up the library at Berkeley? Was
Something
it?
like that. He was wasn't he donating his collection somewhere? If I'm not mistaken.
I believe he did, but I can't quite remember where it was. I think it might have been a Californian museum. I don't think it was to Summer Cat's library. I think Summer Cat's library is its sort of own thing. I mean, that's one of the big things about the fandom too, is that like sometimes we have people that are sort of going like interested in sort of the same things, but they don't really correlate too well and like or meet. Yeah, like I literally have the Furcast guys like 15 minutes from where I live, and I haven't like gone on their show yet. It's like I just moved out here, and they're like, yeah, we should meet up sometime. Yeah, that'd be great. And it's like a year later. It's like,
yeah. I mean, again, like I'm pretty sure that that's actually one of the most interesting things about doing interviews like this. It doesn't matter who's doing the interview, whether the questions are going to be the same or not. Like, it's about the idea of feeling that the person on the other side, their voice matters.
oh yeah, for sure. And you know, like we all have been in a place. It's like in your late adolescence, early adulthood, where like you're the new kid on the block, so no one takes anything what you say seriously. But if you keep your nose to the grindstone, eventually, you know, late 20s, you'll probably find something that, you know, okay, now I've gotten myself sort of established into the direction I want to go. I was doing fiction writing. I was doing like, you know, different things, you know, trying to find where my niche was. And eventually I sort of landed here, and it's like, well, there's definitely a need in this particular area. And so, you know, even though I enjoy doing the fiction writing and things like that, you know, the writing craft right now, I think is really needed for nonfiction and keeping a record and things like that, more than fiction writing, which is well covered by people like, you know, Kyle Gold and like Mary Loud and all those other individuals, and they do good works, and it's like they're pretty good about getting out content pretty regularly, and I think that market is pretty sound. The furry nonfiction and collecting things like that, I think this is where I need to be. Basically, it's one of those things. It's like this is where I need to be because this is something that if I wasn't here, you know, it could have an adverse effect, which is why like more people coming in writing is good, because that way if, you know, God forbid I get struck by lightning the next day, you know that, you know, people can continue to do that.
All right. Well, we're going to say, and if you just want to plug anything else, more than fine to do that, or we good?
So it's Flayrah.com, FLAYRAH.com for the written news site, and then there is the my YouTube channel, which is World in Review, and I hope to see you guys there, and I hope that someone in the audience is interested in what nonfiction has to offer.
Perfect. Okay. Great stuff. Thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate that. It's really good to hear from you.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. It's good to hear the sort of the serious side of furry writing sometimes. Like this was a good take. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening, in about 10 minutes from now, we're going to be playing some music here on furry.fm, as is usual for Sunday evenings. We'll be going all the way to midnight. So for the next 2.5 hours, I will be here and playing music for those of you who are still.
Sweet.
Thank you all for being here. Really do appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, guys. See you again week after next, correct?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you'll be playing music next week, but yeah.
Week after next, we do have a guest who...
A guest lined up.
A guest lined up. And yeah, it's going to be a pre-recorded interview. It's going to be with I believe, some of the staffers for a movie venture in horror.
Ooh, interesting.
Horror and furries.
Furry horror.
Furry horror.
Because
So
we got enough drama going on.
I'm assuming it's going to be furry murder. I'm not necessarily sure what's going to happen, but we'll see. We'll talk about that soon.
Awesome.
All right.
And yeah, then we'll see you guys again shortly. And
Yes.
enjoy the music after this.
All right.
Yeah, and Tantroo, once again, thank you so much for being on.
Yes.
No worries. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheerio.